I still remember the afternoon she looked straight through me as if I were a piece of forgotten furniture. My mother had always possessed a remarkable talent for making silence feel louder than screaming. She didn't insult me often. She didn't need to. The way she dismissed my words, overlooked my accomplishments, and reserved every ounce of warmth for my younger sister, Claire, carved wounds that no one else could see. "Mom," I said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen with a folder clutched tightly in my hands, "I got promoted." She barely glanced away from the pie she was decorating. "That's nice." That was all. Claire wandered in moments later carrying a shopping bag. "Mom, look at these shoes I bought." My mother's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, sweetheart, they're beautiful. Come here, let me see." She hugged Claire, admired the shoes from every angle, and asked a dozen questions about where she'd found them. I quietly folded the promotion letter and slipped it back into my purse. No one noticed. No one ever did. My father had died when I was 19. Before cancer stole him from us, he used to tell me, "Your kindness is your strength, Lily. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." After his funeral, everything changed. The house became Claire's kingdom. I became its unpaid servant. Whenever relatives visited, Mom would introduce Claire proudly. "This is my youngest. She's so creative." Then she'd gesture toward me without even looking. "And that's Lily. Just Lily. No accomplishments. No affection. No pride." It wasn't always obvious enough for outsiders to criticize. That was her genius. She weaponized subtlety. Every birthday dinner somehow became Claire's celebration. Every holiday gift for me was an afterthought. When I bought Mom a custom necklace engraved with her and Dad's wedding date, she thanked me politely before placing it in a drawer. Months later, I found it still inside its box. Yet when Claire bought her a scented candle from a grocery store, Mom displayed it in the living room for nearly a year. People always told me I was imagining things. "She's your mother. She loves you both. You're too sensitive." Eventually I stopped explaining. I simply endured. By 34, I'd built a successful financial consulting business from nothing. Long nights, weekend sacrifices, years without vacations. Every achievement felt hollow because the one person whose approval I'd chased my entire life acted as though I were invisible. Then came the dinner that changed everything. Claire announced she was engaged. The entire family gathered at Mom's house. Champagne flowed. Everyone laughed. Mom had hired caterers, musicians, even photographers. She had never celebrated anything I'd accomplished. Not once. During dessert, Uncle Peter smiled at me. "So, Lily, I heard your company opened a second office." Before I could answer, Mom interrupted. "Work isn't everything." The conversation immediately shifted back to Claire's wedding. I sat there smiling politely while something inside me quietly broke. That night I drove home through pouring rain with tears blurring the windshield. When I reached my apartment, I walked from room to room in complete silence. Everything I'd built, every success, every sacrifice, I'd done all of it hoping that someday she'd finally look at me the way she looked at Claire. She never would. For the first time in my life, I accepted it. The next morning I made a decision. I stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped arranging Sunday lunches, stopped fixing her tax paperwork every year, stopped paying for repairs around her house without telling anyone, stopped solving every family emergency. I simply disappeared. Not dramatically, quietly, peacefully. First, no one seemed to notice. 3 weeks passed. Then 6. 2 months later, Claire finally called. "Mom says you've been distant." "I've been busy." "She's worried." That almost made me laugh. "Worried? She misses you." "I hope she's doing well." Claire sounded confused. "You're not coming for Thanksgiving?" "No." "Christmas?" "No." "Why?" I looked around my peaceful apartment. For the first time in years, holidays no longer filled me with dread. "I think I'm spending this season with people who actually enjoy having me around." Silence stretched between us. Finally she sighed. "You've changed." "No," I answered softly. "I finally stopped begging to be loved." I ended the call before she could respond. The months that followed became the happiest of my adult life. I traveled, made real friends, expanded my business into 3 states. I laughed more than I had in years. Therapy helped me understand something painful. You cannot earn love from someone determined not to give it. One evening my therapist asked gently, "If your mother never changes, can you still have a good life?" I surprised myself. Yes. It was the first honest answer I'd ever given. Nearly a year passed without seeing her. Then one Saturday morning there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Mom standing there. She looked older, smaller somehow. She smiled awkwardly. I was in the neighborhood. She had never once visited my apartment before. Not once. I thought maybe we could have coffee. Every childhood instinct begged me to invite her in. Instead, I simply stepped outside and closed the door behind me. We walked to the cafe across the street. She made small talk about the weather, asked vague questions about work, complimented my coat. It all felt strangely rehearsed, almost forced. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I've missed you." The words should have healed something inside me. Instead they sounded empty, like lines memorized before an audition. For the next several weeks she called regularly. She invited me to dinners. She sent birthday flowers. Claire texted constantly, saying how wonderful it was that the family was together again. Everyone behaved as though the previous 15 years had never happened. Something wasn't right. People rarely transform overnight, especially people who have never admitted they were wrong. Then tiny details began slipping through the cracks. Mom suddenly became unusually interested in my business. She asked about my investments, my clients, my properties. She wanted to know whether I still owned Dad's old cabin that he'd secretly transferred into my name shortly before he died. Questions she had never cared enough to ask before. One afternoon I accidentally arrived early at her house. As I reached the porch, voices drifted through the open kitchen window. Claire laughed. "I told you she'd come back eventually." Mom answered with a confidence that made my stomach tighten. "I knew she would. Lily always wanted a family more than anything." There was a pause. Then Mom said something that froze me where I stood. "Once everything is signed over, we won't have to pretend anymore." My hand slowly slipped away from the doorknob as every forgotten slight, every year of being invisible, every sudden act of kindness rearranged itself into a terrifying new picture. I stayed perfectly still beneath the window, hardly breathing, knowing that if I listened for just a few more moments, I might finally discover the real reason my mother had suddenly remembered she had an older daughter. I remained beneath the kitchen window, barely daring to breathe. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "Are you sure she'll agree?" Mom laughed softly, the same laugh she used whenever she believed she'd already won. "She always has. Lily thinks with her heart. That's why she's so easy to manipulate." Every muscle in my body went rigid. Manipulate. The word echoed louder than anything I'd ever heard. Claire hesitated. "But what if she asks questions about Dad's cabin?" "She won't. We'll tell her the trust needs to be reorganized for tax purposes. She handles finances all day. She'll see paperwork and assume it's routine." I slowly stepped away from the window before either of them could notice my shadow. The drive home felt endless. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. For years I had questioned myself. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I misunderstood her. No, I had understood perfectly. I simply hadn't wanted the truth. That evening I unlocked the small fireproof safe in my study and pulled out the leather folder Dad had left me. Inside rested every document connected to the cabin. A handwritten letter fell onto my desk. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the aging paper. "Lily, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. There are things I couldn't fix while I was alive. I know your mother loves Claire differently than she loves you. I tried to change it, but I couldn't. So I'm leaving the cabin in your name alone. Not because it's valuable, because it's the only place where you were always happiest. Promise me one thing. Never let guilt convince you to surrender what belongs to you. You spend your whole life giving pieces of yourself away. One day choose yourself. Love, Dad." The tears came before I reached the end. For years I had believed Dad never noticed. He had noticed everything. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried until the ache inside me settled into something unfamiliar. Not sadness. Resolve. The next morning I called my attorney, Daniel Harper. He had handled my business for nearly a decade and knew my family only through brief stories. I need every document connected to my father's estate reviewed. His voice became serious immediately. Did something happen? I think someone wants me to sign away property without telling me why. Don't sign anything. I wasn't planning to. He asked me to bring every paper I had. 3 hours later he leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. Lily, this is interesting. What is? The cabin itself isn't worth much. I know. But the land beneath it is. I frowned. What do you mean? He turned his monitor toward me. The county approved a luxury lakeside development 6 months ago. Most surrounding land has already been purchased. He zoomed in on a map. Except this parcel. Dad's cabin. The developers have been trying to acquire it. How much is it worth? Daniel looked at another report before meeting my eyes. Based on current offers, somewhere between $12 and $14 million. I stared at him. I thought it was worth maybe $200,000. It was. Until the zoning changed. Suddenly every strange conversation made sense. Mom's sudden affection. Claire's phone calls. The fake concern. They hadn't missed me. They had discovered what Dad had quietly left behind. And they wanted it. Daniel folded his hands. There's something else. What? The property cannot be transferred unless you personally authorize it before a notary. So that's why they're suddenly acting like a family. He nodded sympathetically. I'm afraid so. I left his office feeling strangely calm. The pain hadn't disappeared. It had simply transformed. When people reveal who they truly are, uncertainty dies. The following Sunday Mom invited me to dinner again. This time I accepted. She greeted me with a hug so exaggerated it almost felt theatrical. My sweet girl. She had never called me that before. Claire smiled brightly from the dining room. I'm so glad we're together again. I smiled back. So am I. For the first time in my life I was playing the same game they were. Dinner was almost amusing. Mom laughed at every joke I made. Claire complimented my dress. They asked endless questions about work. At dessert Mom casually cleared her throat. Oh, by the way. Here it comes. Our accountant suggested simplifying some family assets. I kept my expression relaxed. What kind of assets? Dad's old cabin. Claire leaned forward. None of us uses it anymore. Mom nodded. It would be easier if everything stayed under one family trust. She slid a folder across the table. I had someone prepare preliminary paperwork. I didn't even open it. Instead I smiled. I never sign legal documents without my attorney. For the first time all evening, both their smiles flickered. Mom recovered quickly. Of course, sweetheart. It's only routine. I'm sure it is. Claire laughed nervously. We're family. I know. The room became strangely quiet. I watched both of them carefully. Neither touched their dessert. Neither looked relaxed anymore. Good. Over the next month they tried everything. Mom cried over the phone. I don't understand why you suddenly don't trust me. I almost answered honestly. As I finally do. Instead I said, business has taught me to verify everything. Claire invited me shopping. She sent old childhood photographs. She even apologized for being distant growing up. Not once did either of them apologize for years of cruelty. Only for distance. There was a difference. Daniel suggested documenting every interaction. People motivated by money often become desperate. His prediction proved correct. One evening an unfamiliar number called me. The man introduced himself as a representative from the development company. I understand your family has been discussing the property. My family has. I haven't. He sounded relieved. Miss Bennett, we'd actually prefer negotiating directly with you. He mentioned a number. $15 million. I nearly dropped the phone. When I declined to discuss details, he added something unexpected. Before you make any decision, you deserve to know we've received inquiries from relatives claiming they'll soon control the property. My heartbeat slowed. So someone has already contacted you? Several times. I thanked him and ended the call. Within minutes another realization struck me. Mom and Claire weren't simply hoping I'd sign. They had already promised someone else that I would. which meant they were running out of time. 2 nights later, Mom called in tears. "Lily, I need you to come over." "What happened?" "It's your grandmother." My stomach lurched. "Is she all right? Please, just come." I arrived 20 minutes later. Grandma wasn't there. Instead, Mom, Claire, and an unfamiliar man in an expensive suit were waiting in the living room. A stack of legal documents rested neatly on the coffee table. The trap had finally been set. And as I stepped inside, pretending not to recognize exactly what they were trying to do, I realized they had made one fatal mistake. They still believed I was the invisible daughter who would sacrifice everything just to be accepted. They had no idea that I had already uncovered the truth, and that every smile I had given them over the past month had been leading them toward a reckoning they would never forget. The moment I stepped into the living room, I knew every detail had been carefully staged. The curtains were drawn. Fresh coffee sat untouched on the table. The man in the tailored suit stood the instant he saw me. "Lily," Mom said warmly, "thank you for coming so quickly." I looked around the room. I thought Grandma was sick. An uncomfortable silence followed. Claire avoided my eyes. Mom forced a smile. "Well, she had a little scare earlier, but she's fine now." It was the weakest lie she'd ever told. The attorney extended his hand. "James Whitmore." I shook it politely. "My mother said this was urgent." "It is," he replied. He opened the folder. "As your mother explained, this concerns reorganizing family assets." I sat down without touching the papers. "I'd like my attorney present." Mom sighed dramatically. "Lily, must everything become so formal?" "When legal documents are involved, yes." Claire leaned forward. "We're family." I smiled gently. "Exactly why everyone should be protected." James cleared his throat. "The paperwork simply transfers the cabin into a shared family trust." "Who are the beneficiaries?" He hesitated. "Your mother and your sister." I looked directly at him. "My name isn't listed?" Silence. Mom answered instead. "Sweetheart, it's only for administrative purposes. So after I sign, I no longer own it." "Technically." I asked a simple question. James lowered his eyes. "No. You would no longer own the property." I slowly closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I'm not signing." Mom's expression changed instantly. Years of carefully rehearsed affection disappeared in a heartbeat. "What do you mean you're not signing?" "I mean exactly that." Claire folded her arms. "You're being selfish." I couldn't help smiling. "There it is." "What?" "The real conversation." Mom's voice sharpened. "After everything I've done for you." I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound startled all three of them. "Everything you've done for me? You've always had a home. I paid your mortgage for 7 years. Her face drained of color. "You what?" "I transferred money anonymously through Dad's old accountant after the bank threatened foreclosure." Claire stared at Mom. "You told me you paid the mortgage yourself." Mom remained speechless. I continued calmly. "I also paid for your roof replacement. The furnace. Your property taxes twice. The plumbing repairs after the basement flooded." James looked increasingly uncomfortable. Claire blinked repeatedly. I didn't know any of that." "No," I said softly. "You weren't supposed to." I had never wanted recognition. I simply wanted my mother to live comfortably. Mom finally found her voice. "You chose to do those things." "I did. And I never expected gratitude." I leaned forward. "But don't stand there and pretend you sacrificed for me." The room had become painfully quiet. Then I reached into my handbag. "I brought something." Dad's letter. I placed it gently on the coffee table. Mom recognized the handwriting immediately. Her breathing changed. "Where did you get that?" "Dad. He wrote it before he died." Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. She barely reached the middle before tears filled her eyes. She looked at me. "He knew. He knew everything." She couldn't continue reading. Instead, she covered her mouth. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine shame on her face. But shame wasn't the same as accountability. "I also know the land is worth $15 million. Claire's head snapped toward Mom. "What?" Mom whispered. "Who told you that?" "My attorney." Claire looked horrified. You said it was barely worth anything. Mom couldn't answer. I turned toward James. Did they tell you the property's actual market value before asking you to prepare those papers? His silence answered the question. I was informed it was a routine estate adjustment. It wasn't. He slowly packed his briefcase. I believe my services are no longer required. Without another word, he stood and walked out. The front door closed behind him. No one moved. Finally, Claire spoke. You lied to me too? Mom stared at the floor. I was protecting both of us. Claire laughed bitterly. No. You were protecting yourself. She turned toward me. Lily. I raised a hand. Don't. I didn't know. No. You just spent your entire life enjoying the benefits. She burst into tears. I'm sorry. I should have noticed. You should have. For years I had imagined this moment. I thought exposing the truth would make me feel victorious. And said, I felt tired. Very tired. Mom looked up slowly. What do you want? It was the first honest question she'd ever asked me. I wanted a mother. Her shoulders collapsed. I can't change the past. No. You can't. Another long silence settled over the room. Then she whispered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I was jealous. I frowned. Jealous. Of you. The words sounded impossible. You look so much like your father. She wiped her eyes. Every time I looked at you, I saw him. I loved him more than anyone. When he got sick, he leaned on you. He trusted you. He laughed with you. I hated that I was losing him. Her voice broke completely. And after he died, I blamed the only person who reminded me of everything I'd lost. The confession landed like a stone. It explained everything. But it excused nothing. You punished a child. I know. For 15 years. I know. You watched me beg for your love. She nodded through tears. I know. I can't undo it. No. You can't. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Broken. Human. But consequences remain, even after understanding arrives. I stood. I'm selling the property. Both women looked at me. The developers made an offer. Mom whispered. You deserve every penny. I do. I won't argue. I know. Claire asked quietly. Will you ever forgive us? I considered the question carefully. I already have. Their faces lifted hopefully. Then I finished. But forgiveness isn't an invitation. Confusion replaced hope. I don't hate either of you anymore. I simply don't trust you. And those are different things. I walked toward the front door. Lily. I turned one last time. You spent years making me invisible. The funny thing about invisible people, I smiled sadly, is that you never notice how strong they become while you're looking somewhere else. I left without another word. 3 months later, the sale closed. After taxes and legal fees, I received just over $14 million. I could have bought mansions, luxury cars, private islands. Instead, I established the Arthur Bennett Foundation, named after my father. Its mission was simple: provide scholarships, emergency housing, and legal assistance for young women leaving emotionally abusive families. The first scholarship recipient cried when she received the acceptance letter. She told me, "No one has ever believed in me before." I knew exactly how that felt. As for Mom, she sold her house 2 years later and moved into a small apartment. Not because I abandoned her, but because for the first time in her life she had to live within the limits of her own choices. Claire eventually divorced her fiancé after discovering he had only stayed once he learned about the expected land deal. Ironically, she experienced a betrayal built on the same greed she had once ignored in herself. She wrote me several heartfelt letters over the years. I answered only one. It wasn't a reunion. It was an acknowledgement that people can change if they're willing to face themselves honestly. Mom continued writing every Christmas. The first letters were filled with excuses. The later ones contained only apologies. I read every one. I replied to none. Not out of cruelty. Out of peace. One crisp autumn morning, I drove to the empty hill where Dad's cabin had once stood. The developers had preserved one old oak tree at my request. I stood beneath its branches with his letter folded in my coat pocket. You were right, I whispered into the quiet air. I finally chose myself. The wind stirred the leaves above me, carrying away the weight I had carried since childhood. Walking away from my mother hadn't revealed a new version of her. It had revealed the truth she had spent years hiding. And in uncovering her real motives, I discovered something far more valuable than the land she wanted. I discovered that my worth had never depended on being seen by the wrong person. It had always been there, waiting for the day I finally saw it myself.